Councillor Miller. Good evening, everybody. Please can I welcome you to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee on Thursday, the 20th of July, from the Walton Suite at Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Margot Power, Chairperson of the committee. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Can I remind members, including me, to use their microphones and turn their mobile phones off? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Turning to the agenda. Mrs. Graham, the apologies, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've had apologies from Cabinet Member Councillor Becker and also from Cabinet Member Councillor Cutler, who is joining us online today.
Thank you very much. And do we have any declarations of interest this evening? Thank you. None. I do only have one chair's announcement. I attended a webinar on the future of public sector accounting in the face of the delays all councils are experiencing. One of the subjects we discussed was making public sector accounts more comprehensible to the average person. Unfortunately, that seems to require legislation to make changes, but it is in the medium term to be fixed if any legislation gets enacted, of course, which will be a challenge. The next item is to note the Audit and Governance Work Programme on pages 5 and 6.
Madam Chairman, the next meeting we're due to consider the review of the Constitution. And yet, to my knowledge, no meetings have been arranged of the working group, which are meant to be finished by the end of this month. Are members not going to be involved in reviewing the Constitution?
Mrs. Evans?
Thank you, Chair. I've actually just come from a meeting with the Leader of the Opposition this afternoon. Councillor Caroline Horrell, for the Leader of the Opposition this afternoon, and in line with our timetable and that of Councillor Becker, who I've been working closely with regard to this review, we're in the process of just putting dates in diaries. So we have one planned hopefully for the very end of July, and then we're also looking to again call the Constitution Working Party together in August. So yes, the answer is in summary that members will be fully involved.
Madam Chairman, it doesn't look like it. The Constitution review has been happening for 4.5 years. Your good self has only been involved in the recent weeks, but there have been no meetings of substance of a working group. We have not had a single correct copy of the Constitution for over 4 years. We cannot print out a copy of the Constitution or even see one in one place, which is definitive. Surely our involvement and the speed of resolving this issue requires a bit more certainty in planning.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, one of my priorities in coming to this council was instigating and starting the review of the Constitution. As you say, there has been elements of review that have taken place in the last number of years. And what I have done in the last few weeks, months, I should say, since my arrival, is work very, very closely with, again, members and officers And I've taken on board many of the comments that have sat documented, I believe, since the previous Constitution Working Party. So those have all been taken on board, as have comments from our democratic services. So we start with a kind of officer view, and then a monitoring officer's review. And certainly my priority is to see this move, and it has been moving. A draft has already gone before the executive leadership board, and it is now in the process of being circulated. It's I have no doubt that you're aware, it is a large document in pages, and we're working out the best way to circulate that to the Constitution Working Party. But there is a document that stands as our constitution at the present time. It is fit for purpose. We use it and we can use it, but that doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement. So that is something that I'm working very, very hard and very closely with all of those that need to be involved. But certainly the timetable has been shared and will be shared further, no doubt, to other members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. We look forward to seeing that in the near future, I'm sure. Councillor Godfrey, are you content?
I've heard what the director said, and I shall wait the glorious day when my every need is met.
Lovely. Thank you, councillors. Any other questions? Are we happy to note the work programme? Thank you. Moving on then to the minutes of the previous meeting. Do we have any questions on those minutes, or are we happy to agree them as presented? Agreed. Thank you very much. And we have no public participation. With your agreement, members, I would like to move item 12 up to this point in the agenda, so that the gentlemen from Hampshire County Council can go about their business for the evening, if that will be okay. Item 12? No. Yes.
Item 11, sorry, apologies, that's a mistake with my chair's script.
Oh dear, Nancy, you've let me down. Item 11, the Treasury Management. Let's find it in the papers, shall we? Item 11, which is on pages 80, 85, 55, 85. Mr. Mountflower, would you like to take it away? Thank you.
Oh, good evening, members. Nice to see you all, and thank you very much for changing your agenda to suit us. I feel very selfish, so thank you for that. I'll briefly run through this report and then happily take any of your questions. For those that have seen us before, this report is sort of one in the series that we present throughout the year, and this is kind of the end of the story. So we present a treasury management strategy to you at the time that you're looking at the authority's budget. We then report a mid-year position, which will become 2 reports this year, and then we come back at this time to give you an outturn or a year-end report to tell you how we've gone about delivering that treasury management strategy. If I sort of briefly move through the report, I won't particularly dwell on the economic background for this report. It's fairly hard to avoid the economic news at the moment, so I assume everyone's fairly familiar with that. Just one thing that some of the things that make the economic news tough for the general public actually make it quite slightly more interesting from our point of view, and it's slightly more interesting to have a higher interest rate environment to operate in, and I'll come on to sort of show some examples of that in a minute. If I touch on table 1 on the bottom of page 90, and apologies that our formatting seems to have gone a little bit skewy around this table, but this just shows a succinct summary of the council's financial position. You can see there's been an increase in the capital financing requirements. So that's the CFR that's shown midway through that table, and that's the level of borrowing that's required to fund your capital expenditure. That's grown through the last year, but without any increase in external borrowing. Actually, a decrease in external borrowing there's been a repayment in line with the maturity profile that there was. So that increase in the need to borrow has been funded from internal resources or internal borrowing, and that's been one of the reasons for a reduction in the cash investments we've got, which is the total of that table, which, apologies, falls over the other side of that page there. As I said, there's been no new borrowing, so I'll skip ahead, if I may, to table 4, which is on page 93, which just gives a more detailed breakdown of the investments we hold for the authority. This is important in showing how we've complied with the investment strategy. And as a reminder, our priorities for managing any investments are the priorities given to us from SIPFA for their Treasury Management Code, which we invest in the order of priority of security so that we get your money back. We get the money back in its entirety, any amount we've invested. Second priority, liquidity, so we make sure we have cash available to you when you have obligations to meet. And then finally, yield, so that we obviously try and then within those constraints make the best returns that we can for you. It's a bit of a challenging picture at the moment because actually these returns, by current comparison in the way that base rates keep increasing almost month on month, look quite low, but we have achieved some relatively competitive returns for you in the last year, and that's providing an increased amount of contribution for your day-to-day activities. So we hope we're providing some useful input there, and we've continued to look to utilise a variety of different investments there. To illustrate what gives us some confidence that we think we're doing a reasonable job, the table 5 on the following page is a benchmarking comparison that we get from your advisors, Arlen Close, which shows that we've been able to achieve a higher credit rating, so a higher level of security on average for your investments, but with also an increase in level of return, so comparing 3.95 to 3.67 there of a comparable authority. So we think we've hopefully added a bit of value there. I think that is probably where I'll leave it, if I may, Chairman, and then happily take on board any of your questions, if I may.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butler. Members, do we have questions? Councillor.
I have 2 questions, Madam Chairman. The report refers to the pooled property fund, and I'd like to see that the market value is stated as at the end of March, still showing a small profit, and as well as the extra interest we received from that fund. Is it the officer's understanding that this remains a good investment for the council, given the volatility of property at this time?
It's a very good and pertinent question, thank you, and it's one we pick up with the advisors, Arlen Close, on a fairly regular basis. We do expect it to be a pretty tough environment for property investments in the not just the near future, but potentially extending out with that, both for a combination of kind of the economic environment and actually what other long-term investments are doing, with the number of private DB pension funds probably looking to exit illiquid investments like property. But nonetheless, we and Arlen Close remain comfortable with it at the moment, and it's something we'll continue to keep talking to your officers about. If you like, it's a small hedge against interest rates falling more rapidly than perhaps is expected. So it's not a big proportion of the overall investments, and therefore we still think it has a place in, if you like, the portfolio of investments we manage as a whole.
My second question is probably for Ms. Keys. The repayment of £5 million, I presume from the HRA debt, that's come from our reserves. Does it mean there's then going to be an increase in the amount transferred from HRA to the general fund to make up for that loss of interest from the amount of reduced reserve. Obviously, the interest was paid by the HRA in the past on that debt, but now we used up reserves to pay off that that amount.
Mrs. Keys, would you like to take that one?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the HRA internally borrows from the general fund, if you like, and pays the general fund. Earn an interest calculations done between the two funds. So that's been adjusted for the fact that internal resources have gone down as a result of not refinancing that loan, which you're correct, that relates to the HRA's loan portfolio to do with the self-financing of the housing.
Thank you very much. I do have one question. These figures, these returns, table 4, are as at the end of March. Do you have a view on what the returns are likely to be at the end of June?
I don't have an exact number for you, but we would expect to be exceeding base rates at any given time. So the amount in money market funds will be probably slightly lagging that, but then any long-term investments we can make for the authority, we will be exceeding that. So on average, I'd expect to be up there and just above base rates as they continue to rise.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, Mr. Butler? Any debate? We are asked to note this report. Let's just look at the recommendations, which is on page 85 of your papers. Are we happy to note the report? Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Hope you have a good meeting.
Moving on, we will look at the internal audit report and opinions. May I remind members that we will need to go into exempt before we look at the appendix, but if we look at the main report first, that would be a big help. Mr. Harvey, are you presenting this one?
Indeed. Thank you, Chair. So this is one of the requirements of internal audit, is we provide an annual internal audit report and opinion in relation to 2022-23, which is sort of culmination of all of the audit activity that's been undertaken throughout the year. So if I can refer members to agenda page 20. The opinion is always in 3 parts. So firstly, that I'm satisfied that we've completed sufficient work in order for me to be able to form a reasonable conclusion on the council's adequacy and effectiveness of the overall control environment. And in my opinion, the frameworks of governance, risk management and control are reasonable. And as always, for all audit work, if we identify any areas for improvement, we work with officers to identify sort of pragmatic corrective actions and timescales for improvement. Now, in order to form an overall reasonable assurance opinion, it's based on all of the work undertaken. So there were 20 pieces of assurance work completed. There were some other non-assurance pieces of work also completed. And of those, 65% concluded with reasonable assurance, which is 13 reviews. 30% was substantial, which is 6 reviews. And as noted, there was 1 review, which we'll cover in the exempt item, which was a limited assurance. And I'm pleased to note there were no reports that concluded with no assurance opinion. Now, we'll have provided for you in the appendix, which is pages 26 to 29 of the agenda pack, a brief sort of summary of the what was covered by the reviews and the outcome of those, but I won't propose to dwell on those in any detail. Moving to agenda page 24, on pages 22 to 23, what we've also provided is a very brief summary under the different banners that we need to give the assurance on. So governance, risk management and control, just to sort of give you a flavour of the activity in those areas. Moving on to agenda page 24, there are no disclosures and non-conformance to reports. And then moving on to the final page of the main report, which provides our audit performance. So there were 2 reviews that didn't quite make this annual report and opinion. So they remained work in progress. So we were slightly behind our target of 95% completion. With a plan of this size, it's all or nothing. We either make the target and it's 100% or we're slightly behind. So unfortunately, there were 2 reviews that didn't quite make it. That work won't be wasted. It just carry forward and contribute towards your 23-24 assurance opinion. You may remember we conducted a stakeholder survey back in the first part of the year, and it was an overwhelming positive response rate, both from the council individually at 99% above our target of 90, but also it was reflective of the partnership as a whole. And we were fully compliant with all elements of the public sector and town audit standards. So before I take any questions, obviously I'd like to pass on our thanks to all officers, because audit isn't always welcome, because we're an unwelcome distraction sometimes, but you know, it takes 2 to tango and we can't do our work without all of their help. So I'd like to formally pass on all of our thanks for I think what was a very successful year and a very positive assurance outcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harvey. Do we have questions? Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, with regards to page 27, the programme and project management, I know if I read the report correctly, there are 4 projects active, but none of which are following the developed high-level project framework. So one would assume there are plans for those projects to adopt the framework, or at least align to it. Maybe could ask you to provide a comment on that.
Mr. Howson, do you want to take that one, or Mr. Harvey?
I can take that, Chair. Thank you. Since the council's done the work and approved or adopted the updated programme project management methodology, those projects referred to in there are aligned to following our methodology and using the correct templates to ensure consistency across all projects.
Thank you, Mr. Howson. Any other questions? Could I just look at the question about the contract management on page 28, where we had, I think it's page 28, where we had some contracts not on the register. Is that now fixed? Mr. Keys, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We have, I have today cleared the final audit report in relation to this audit, and in there is a management action to address that. So we will remind all staff of the need to put contracts onto the contract register. So we're putting in some mitigation to ensure that that improves going forward.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Would you like to debate any of the content of this part of the paper, or would you like to move into exempt? Councillor Godfrey, do you have an opinion?
I have a point on the exempt element. That's all.
Thank you. I propose that we then go into exempt. Do I need a seconder for that, Mrs. Gray?
Yes, please.
Could I have that seconded, please, Councillor? Thank you very much. We are back in open session. Is there any further debate on the substance of the report from internal audit report? I just have one question, Mr. Harvey. I like the level of assurance you are able to give us, not that we're competitive, but how do we stand against other councils in this matter?
I think the given, what was it, 95% being either substantial or reasonable, it's a very good outcome. I think, yeah, very well governed. I don't think we tend to find many areas of significance. I would say you compare very favourably to other similar authorities, but I won't know which ones because I look after some of them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harvey, and maybe we should pass our thanks on to staff for the way in which they work with internal audit to make sure we are better. Thank you very much. Are we happy to note this report, members? Thank you very much. Moving on. Thank you, Mr. Harvey. To our next paper is, I think, certification of claims. Mrs. Horner, would you like to present this?
Thank you, Chair. Is my microphone working? I think it is. Thank you. We did make a very brief report that was circulated with the actual KPMG report returned to us on the housing benefit assurance process. This is regards, obviously, the subsidy claim that we submit to the DWP on housing benefit. I'll run through, if that's okay, the main points that were raised in the report rather than all of the detail. There was a summary report, which was very helpful. They didn't want us to submit the big report, but you've got it anyway. On the first finding regarding rent allowance, there was a small overpayment error that was identified there of 30 pence. The initial case testing of 20, there was nothing in that, but this came from the subsequent testing, the additional testing that happens after the initial testing, as a result of previous years' findings. So on that one, there was, and there is an extrapolation to the sum of £1.15 that's gone in there as well. So that was an amendment to the report, and that was a small, like I say, a small overpayment on a claim, one particular claim for a private pension. The second point to note was just in their words, an observation is regarding a duplication of a personal independent payment that was notification that was pushed through Atlas, which comes through the from the DWP. They pushed through a duplicate. This issue has no impact on the value of benefit paid or any subsidy claimed, but they wanted it observed in the report anyway. We do have a new errors report in order to identify errors of this particular nature. So hopefully in the future, it is a bit of a housekeeping job more than anything else, but hopefully we will still be able to pick it up so that it's one less thing to talk about in the findings. And the third point to note was, again, the details at Appendix C of the main report. And it's on the modified schemes for the cells 214225. This is our war pensions income. On there, they identified a system error on there, which misclassified the expenditure. In this case, it understated in one cell and overstated in another cell. So again, there is no overall change to the report, to the reporting subsidy balance. It was just a reclassification of where figures were sitting within the actual subsidy claim itself. We've taken note of that. War pensions income is a very complex area, I'll just say. So that's the difficulty there. And we're just at the moment, we're in the New Year's audit reporting session. The auditors themselves have picked up the same claim to look at again for the new year. The benefits managers had to make a manual calculation. It's taken quite some considerable time. So far, they're fine. They can't argue with the calculations at all. To an extent, I think they can't actually go through the calculation in detail. The calculation is so complex. So they're still working on that at the moment, and we're hoping we'll have some more detail on that on the next report. But they were the three main findings. So predominantly the 30 pence error was my takeaway from this particular report. But happy to take any questions.
And Mrs. Keys.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reiterate that out of a subsidy claim of millions of pounds, so that error of 30 pence extrapolated across all potential claims of £1.15 on a £10 million subsidy claim is actually a really, really good report. I don't think you could tell from the way Terry delivered that summary there that actually this is a really, really good and reassuring report from our external auditors on this subsidy claim.
I think we do appreciate the magnitude of not only this matter, but also the amount of money that the team handles in all other respects, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, which has been monumental. Do we have any questions, Mrs. Horner?
Only one. Apart from making an absurd acronym, what is cumulative assurance, knowledge and experience?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Godfrey. Quite clearly, it's CAPE. So they are effectively additional tests. So after the initial sample testing on each of the cells that they lay out originally, they do an initial sample testing of 20. On the CAPE testing, they do an additional 40 sample testing, possibly more depending on their findings. But to that extent, that is all I know of CAPE, obviously. Other than I'm hungry. Thank you.
Mrs. Keys.
Yeah, only to add that it's that cumulative assurance. So if they find errors, they test more. If they find more errors in that, they test another sample. And if they find errors this year, then they will automatically do the CAPE testing for that assurance next year. Having had a really good result in the year that we're reporting to you now, they will do fewer tests in the current financial year as a result of that, because they've got the cumulative assurance.
And is there a chance that, I think it was KMG, wasn't it, will charge us less next year as a consequence?
There's a small chance. I'd say it's small though.
Thank you, Mrs. Horner and Mrs. Keys. Do we have any other questions, Mrs. Horner? Thank you. Any debate?
Only to reiterate Mrs. Key's commendation for the success of this process in finding so little to worry about.
Mrs. Horner, you have the thanks of our committee. We are asked to consider this report, and we have considered it. If we are happy to move on. Thank you very much. And the next agenda item is, oh, Nancy, you do confuse me. Sorry. The workforce report. Mr. O'Reilly, are you going to introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. This is the third workforce report for the last financial year. The details are in the report and the appendix. If you don't mind, I will just kind of run through it very briefly and highlight some key points. So the report covers establishment, recruitment turnover, sickness absence, equality, and an HR update. So I'll take those in turn. So the establishment has increased by 3.2%. The headcount is now 445. So it's increased from last year. That's the key point for establishment. I can take questions as I go along or at the end, whatever you prefer, but I'll assume at the end for the time being. Recruitment turnover has increased from 14.5% in the last report this time last year to 16.7%. In this section, we give a description of what sometimes called the total reward package, which supports recruitment and retention at the council. This means that it's the non-pay employee benefits as well as the pay. One change, which is mentioned later in the report to 11.32 under HR updates, is the change to the grading structure, which full council agreed just before the end of the financial year. That will help recruitment retention and should reduce turnover from 16.7% now. So when A&G receives this report next year, I would very much expect that figure to have dropped as a result of that initiative. Sickness absence is 6.82 days per annum per employee, which is a very slight increase on last year. One interesting point is that absence for mental health reasons has dropped from top spot for the first time in many years. We discussed that in HR. It may be linked to the end of the pandemic and the introduction of hybrid working, which increases people's satisfaction with work-life balance. And also, as you know, we have mental health first aiders and a strong emphasis on supporting employees with mental health through the employee benefits I mentioned earlier, including confidential assistance lines and so Quality data details are shown at Appendix 1. One point to mention is that the council has signed up to become an age-friendly employer, and I'm meeting with the national organisation, which is the Centre for Ageing Better, next month to discuss what steps we're going to take to put some flesh on the bones of the pledge we've made to become an age-friendly employer. And the final section, the HR update, tells you what we've been doing in HR around the grading structure I mentioned earlier. The new appraisal system we've introduced as a result of the work of the task and finish group, which met at the beginning of 2022. The work we've done hybrid working, got a new occupational health contract signed. The health plan has been extended. We've just done an employee attitude survey, which we'll report to A&G on in September. And we've updated or introduced 7 HR policies, which are outlined at 11.40. So I'll just stop there and see if anyone's got any comments or questions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. And questions, please. Councillor Akbar.
Thank you, Chair. 11.9, the thanks for the report, by the way. The turnover going from 14.5 to 16.7. Is that something we've seen in other councils? Do we know? How does that compare? Should we be worried?
I think we shouldn't be complacent about that. It's hard to get figures from other councils these days. They're quite reluctant to give up the time to do that. But from an HR theory point of view, it says that 10% turnover is a healthy turnover. I would be comfortable with 12%. So I would have much rather seen a 2% reduction in this report than a 2% increase. So I think, yeah, the turnover is too high. We need to get it down. But we knew that was going to happen. We took steps as a council to deal with that. But clearly those steps only came into force on the 1st of April this year. So we need to give them time to have an effect. So hopefully this time next year, I'm cautiously optimistic that turnover will have dropped.
You'd have a supplementary, please. So I noticed on the recruitment turnover, the main reason for people leaving is going on to public sector appointments. So is that something we should be also concerned with, or something we're not doing that? Why they're going to other companies?
Well, interesting, not mentioning the age-friendly employer, but I'm old enough to remember when we encouraged people to work for other councils when they worked in local government. That was very much when you joined. You joined the family of local government, and you weren't really expected to stay at the same council. So it's not that surprising that the majority of people who move on to other councils. But I think also they tend to move on to the health service and the police. They seem to be the 3 places where most people seem to move on to, but especially to other councils. Quite often it can be just for promotion reasons, or if they move to do a family reason, they move house or whatever. So I think for a lot of people in the public sector, they tend to stay in the public sector. So yeah, I think it's more something to be aware of in the public sector. I think something to be particularly worried about. I'd be more worried if they were all leaving the public sector to go to the private sector. I think, well, what's that telling us? Obviously, some jobs, it's easy to move between them, like kind of engineering type jobs or whatever, but other jobs or HRs or accounting, it's easy to move between private and public, but other jobs are fairly local government specific. So if you're in them, like democratic services, there's don't need that in the private sector too.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thank you.
Anyone? Councillor Godfrey, I beg your pardon.
Thank you. Yes, we look just the same. I have 2 questions, Madam Chairman. Firstly, in 11.15 of a report, it talks about the apprentice scheme. It's not very many apprentices we've got, or apprentices schemes we're running at the moment. What is the council's aspiration for apprentices? And are we not paying more in apprenticeship levy than we're spending on apprenticeships? So we're not actually, we could be covering the cost of more apprentices than we're actually spending at the moment.
Yeah, it's true that in like most organisations, the apprenticeship levy that's taken by the government as sort of payroll tax exceeds the amount of money we get back for training of apprentices. it's worth remembering that the levy doesn't pay for the salaries of apprentices, only for the training. So our aspiration for apprentices is to encourage them, and to that end, the Executive Leadership Board has said that every Scale 3 post that becomes vacant should be first considered for an apprenticeship before it's then considered to be appointed on a full-time basis. So I think our aspiration is to have as many apprentices as possible, short of having a central fund to have supernumerary apprentices, which, as you might recall, is something we discussed at the Task and Finish group, but is quite an expensive option. But in other authorities I worked at in the past, councils have said we'll set aside a sum of money on top of the establishment that we can get in apprentices that often move around the organisation and so on. Quite hard to do in a small organisation like this. Works much better in somewhere like Hampshire County Council or somewhere like that, where you've got more places for them to go and so on. So I think it's difficult, but as you say, as you can see, we are plugging away at it.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We do have sorry. In my other role, there is a thriving apprenticeship development program which works. We don't have any, I don't believe, any junior apprentices, which is a pity, up a hill. My second question is about 11.34. About 9 months ago, we new contracts introducing hybrid working into contracts was introduced. How successful is this new arrangement? Do all eligible employees now work to that new contract? And are they doing at least 50% working in the office?
Yes, they are. It's not a new contract exactly. It's freedom for people to work from home for a certain percentage of their contracted hours. They don't have to do it though, which is why it's not contractual. So some people, like me, prefer to come in most or not all of their contracted time rather than work from home. So nobody's forced to work from home. People can come into the office all of the time. We do keep an eye on people to make sure that you do the 50% in the office. But sometimes people want to work at home more one week and make up the hours the next week, and that's left to service lead discretion. As you recall, we did do a couple of surveys just about working from home during the pandemic to see how people felt about that, and that's where we got the strong message for employees that they wanted to retain some measure of working from home post-pandemic, which is what we've introduced. 50% of the time in the office is actually quite high compared to some other councils, not far from here. So I think it's a great thing to do for team cohesion and for people get to know each other and for keeping it, the one council feel. But we need to bear in mind for some people that could be a reason why they might not want to join us, but might want to join somebody else if they prefer to work at home 4 days a week rather than 50% of the time. So it's something we keep an eye on. But at the moment, it's introduced, it's been accepted by employees, and it's working well.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Unless there are any other questions. Oh, Councillor Miller.
Looking at table 6, the age profile, should we be worried that, relatively speaking, we've got quite a lot of staff getting towards the end of their careers and very few youngsters in our organisation? Is that going to be a problem if we can't get youngsters to come in? I mean, we look like we're in danger in a few years' time of having a lot of vacancies from people with a lot of experience and very few people coming through the system to cover them.
That's an excellent question because it gives me a chance to talk about the age-friendly employer pledge. So I think you've reached a conclusion there that the people there at the end of their careers, which isn't necessarily true. I think that clearly you can see it's a big drop between the blue and the green. One thing we're going to look at is, why is that? Why are people leaving? Is it because of societal expectations, or whatever, or is it because of reasons that we could make it easier for people to stay on? But I think that the age profile in local government and the public sector generally, but local government is always higher, has always been higher than the private sector, probably by about 10 to 15 years. So it's not surprising we have a lot of people working in those yellow and blue brackets. But from my point of view, that's not a problem. That's a good thing. A lot of very experienced healthy people there that are going to hopefully carry on working.
One of my questions was whether that should be on the risk assessment. We did discuss this, I think, a year ago, Mr. O'Reilly, didn't we?
I don't think there's a risk though. I mean, if we can, we're assuming it's not. I can understand it would be a risk if we still had the statutory retirement age of 65. It would be a massive risk. But as we haven't, then I don't see it as a risk. I don't think we've got a cliff edge coming up. I think a lot of those people are thinking, well, look at them, they're bound to leave in a year's time. Not necessarily true.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's also important to say, and I completely, and we do completely appreciate what we've just heard our head of HR talk about with regard to age, and it's one of the things that I noticed, and I'm quite happy to admit I'm probably in that bar chart towards the end of my career. But we do also, it's also worth pointing out that we do also plan, and something that we do work within our services and across with our corporate heads of service. We do look to this succession planning and building in those roles and looking to who we already have within the organisation that we can develop and bring forward. So that's really important to mention as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. I have a couple of questions, Mr. O'Reilly. First of all, it was much publicised that some people suffered postural problems from working at home during the pandemic. I wondered if we had experienced that and whether we felt that had been properly addressed by our health and safety reviews.
Sorry, Miss, what kind of problems did you say?
Postural problems from people working in their kitchens and without proper seating.
Okay, well, we addressed that in two ways. One, in the survey, we said if you feel that you haven't got the proper DSE equipment you need, C attached, then contact us and we'll send it to you. So we sent people chairs, we sent them monitors, various bits of IT equipment were shipped out of West Wing mainly to people's homes and we've got a record of where they are now kept by IT. And also in the hybrid working policy, there is provision for us to review how people are getting on from a health and safety point of view. And the fact that HR met with our health and safety manager only last week to say that we need to kind of get on with that and contact people and just check that they're still working in a safe way, because we are still responsible, as you know, for their health and safety when working from home. But they should be working with our equipment. And as I said, if somebody's got back my previous thought, somebody said, well, I work in this really cramped houseboat in Newbury and I can't work from home. The answer is, well, don't work from home. Come in. I mean, you don't have to work from home. Come in. We've got a perfectly safe place for you right here.
You said that review was in progress. I think we'd like to know that work has been done, please, to make sure staff are safe working at home.
Yeah, I can report that next time I'm at the committee in September.
Thank you very much. Any other points, Mr. O'Reilly? Councillor Ackroyd.
So just the very last table 7, on the ethnic of the staff. Still not looking that great yet. Just wondered, what are we trying to do to encourage others to join the company?
Well, our equality statement is part of our recruitment package, if you like. So we make it clear that everybody is welcome to apply to the council regardless of any protected characteristic. We haven't got a positive action campaign around encouraging people from ethnic communities to apply to the council particularly, but we haven't made any particular issue around ethnic status. So if you like, we'll all protect all of the 9 protected characteristics are treated in exactly the same way. It's worth noting that we haven't got a complete set of data for our employees because it's voluntary self-reporting, and only 38% of our employees have actually said what their ethnic status is. So it's not one that we have, massive. We haven't done a lot on it. We haven't got a lot of massive data on it either.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. It notes in the report that we support continuous professional development. were I looking to join an organisation, I would find that attractive. But do we have any way of quantifying how much we achieve or how much we deliver in that respect, so that we can use it as another rose in our recruitment plans?
Well, we have in the new appraisal form, we have a special section on what professional development learning did you do in the previous 12 months? What are you planning to do the next 12 months? And then before, what did you learn? What's the value for money? And going forward, how's that linked to your objectives and the service objectives and council plan and so on. So we have a conversation about that twice a year with employees. As far as recording is concerned, we are having a conversation. We've got a new HR officer for learning and development, Yolene, who's just joined us in the last few months. We're having a conversation with housing, particularly a lot of training about how can we record CPD in a way that's very accessible. Do we record it on our system or on their system? There are some technical questions around what do you mean, what does one mean by CPD? Because if you're in the law society or whatever, it would have a particular meaning. You do 6 hours of training, it gives you so many points. If you're in HR, it's probably that's a bit fuzzier. If you're not in a profession at all, you still might go on a lot of training and learn a lot. But how you quantify it, other than just saying I went on this course, because quite often you don't want to quantify any kind of a number. I've done so many points this year. It's something we're discussing at the moment to see whether there's a way that we can find out what other people are doing and so on. So again, that's work in progress, to be able to easily say globally, this is how much CPD people have done. So yes, it's one that's on our radar, very much so.
I know from experience that if councillors haven't done the training they should have done, they get chased very quickly.
I mean, I'm obviously not talking about mandatory training. That's mandatory, so everybody does that. We do chase that. I'm talking about, I mean, to my mind, CPD is people who want to progress their careers and want to do more than just a mandatory training, which they have to do, which we all have to do. And it's very much encouraged, as we said.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Any other points we wish to discuss? Any questions? Are we happy to note this report? Thank you very much. And moving on to governance monitoring, Mrs. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, agenda item 10, and this is the Q1 governance monitoring report. I'm the responsible officer. Now, the purpose of this report is to provide members of the Audit and Governance Committee a summary and overview of the key issues in respect of governance during the first quarter of this 23/24 financial year. The report sets out summary information that concerns governance, and we look at the annual governance statement, progress against the actions included in the 22-23 annual governance statement. That's included and found in Appendix 1 of this report. Reports on declarations of gifts and hospitality, and during the period 1 April 2023 to the 30th of June of this year, there were no declarations of gifts and hospitality made by officers in accordance of our employee code of conduct. Members also regularly update their register of interest forms, and during the same period, there were 4 declarations of gifts of hospitality over the value of £50 made by members in accordance with that policy. Internal audit assurance report. Now, internal audit provides an evaluation. We've heard about that already this evening through a risk-based approach on the effectiveness of governance, risk management and internal control operating at this council. Now, during 2022 and 2023, there were no audit review reports that concluded with a no assurance or limited assurance opinion, meaning all were substantial or reasonable. And it's important to say that the previous audit result that we talked about in exempt session and discussed earlier at agenda item 7 is not included in this Q1 report because it hasn't officially and formally been issued. And I'm hoping everyone's nodding and that information is right. We've got the right person in the room to confirm that for me. So in line with the agreed audit plan, 23 to 24. Audit reviews commenced during the quarter, and in the early stages with no audits completed before the 30th of June. An update on progress covering Q1 and Q2 will, however, be included in the internal audit progress report 23-24 and appended to the Q2 governance monitoring report. The graph below that is found on page 58 of the addenda pack shows those assurance opinions of the completed internal audits that were included in the audit plans for the years 2019 to 20 to the current year 23 to 24. So there's a graph in there, and the narrative that sits behind that is since our last report, the Q4 report was presented to this committee on the 12th of June. There have been 5 internal audit reports finalised and issued before the 30th of June. All of the reports concluded with either reasonable or substantial opinion, one being contract management, leisure centres, that was reasonable, health and safety gave us reasonable assurance, IT, excuse me, Chair, IT asset management, reasonable assurance, procurement, reasonable assurance, and human resource, HR policies, substantial assurance. Also within the report, internal audit management tracking, corporate heads of service, service leads and executive leadership board, they regularly review the progress against the management actions included within internal audit reports. These are reported on a quarterly basis in a summary table showing the status of these actions. These actions are kept under regular review, and to assist members' understanding, an additional narrative is included in the table to provide a brief explanation of progress being made against overdue audit actions and any reasons for delay. As you can see on page 59 of the report, there are currently 11 overdue management actions, 4 being high priority. This is there are less reported than previously at our last committee, and there's a chart showing the overdue actions by length of time that has passed since the target date for completion. So although there are still a number of outstanding audit actions, progress has been made on each one of them since the committee last met. And I think I raised and mentioned that this is a priority of mine, a personal priority of mine, to get these audit actions, the overdue actions, dealt with and finalised and completed. Further information relating to the current overdue internal management actions, as I said, is shown on that on the table, pages 60 and 61. There is a narrative that follows behind in the subsequent pages, and I'm happy to go through those, or I can wait until members' questions. I will, however, draw your attention to page 67 of the report, where we look at code of conduct complaints, not only because I can report to the committee that we have no outstanding code of conduct complaints, but also because the last committee we resolved to record and report the time taken on our the conclusion of those conduct cases, and you can find that again on the appendix. The time taken is shown in there. So the 2 that we had outstanding have since been completed, and in accordance with your resolution, that time taken is found on that report. So I'll hand you back to our chair. The recommendations will be found on page 55. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans, and congratulations on having no outstanding complaints. We're very happy, as I'm sure you are. Councillors, questions please on this report. Oh, well, in that case, I shall start. On page 66, it refers to the appropriate member of the leaders board on complaints. We're talking about handling of complaint handling. Should it not also be the cabinet member that is informed of that complaint? It says from May 23, this has also been shared with the relevant director. And I'm questioning whether that should be shared with the cabinet member as well. Under review current performance and identify areas and services where the council standard is not being achieved. Sorry, Mrs. Keys.
Yeah, just to explain that one. So we produce a report corporately, which is broken down by the corporate head of service, which gives a summary of all the complaints received, and the request that goes alongside that is for corporate heads to review those and identify whether there's any trends in them. And ELB requested that those reports are also copied to the directors responsible for each of those areas, to ensure that that's happening and that we have a consistent approach across the organisation. So that's why we've added that from May 23. This has also been shared with the relevant director.
So do we not feel that the cabinet member ought to be aware of those trends?
Thank you, Chair. I think particularly if trends are found, we were the discussion excuse me, the discussion at ELB was that directors were made aware of complaints with a view to looking for trends and then any training opportunities that needed to be taken in order to address the frequency of complaint. But certainly I believe if and feel that if trends were found, then yes, this would be something we would report to our cabinet member.
Thank you very much. My other question relates to page 83, which is about the fire coating on balcony cladding. And it refers to us not having the right to access to rectify these matters. What powers do we have where an aspect of an owned flat may put other residents at risk? See no volunteers to answer that one. So perhaps we should ask that question be asked of housing, if we could. Are we happy to do that, members? Oh, Mrs. Evans, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. There will be certain powers that we are able to use, particularly if if there are other members of the public put at risk. But I'm assured that any action that we are able to take in collaboration with our other agency and other agencies, that is something that we're working for. But we can certainly get any additional detail and ask that question and bring it back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. It has arisen locally, not the balconies, but the doors, in fact. Thank you. That's all questions I have. Do we have any debate on this report? Councillor Godfrey, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Going on to the governance side of it, this report, in Appendix 3, the Corporate Risk Register, I'm particularly interested in the risk CR007, the lack of funding over medium term. I wonder if it's possible to confirm that the residual risk is in fact unlikely to occur, as is in the report, which would be reassuring. The challenge for local authorities at the moment would seem to put that into doubt. So is the risk unlikely? And secondly, the current controls on that risk all seem to be a bit passive, in that they're all reviews and monitoring, with two exceptions. One is keeping £2 million in a bank account, which I've never quite understood how that would affect the price of fish. And the progress of the transformation challenge, which I presume is the strategic business review, and what impact that has had on the risks, and when we're going to hear about that.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. You will be able to give us a very good update.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So CR007 refers to the financial challenges across the medium term. Clearly, if I was concerned about balancing next year's budget, that would be a much greater risk. And the residual risk score looking at that is still in the amber, because over the medium term there's still huge uncertainty around the future of local government finance. So that's not referring to balancing a budget, but clearly across the sector there's more and more 114 notices being issued from councils who are unable to balance their current year and future year budgets. With regards to the current controls that we have in place, obviously our key control for addressing our long-term, medium-term financial strategy issues is our Transformation Challenge programme. So that is, I won't say in early days, but it's still in, it's at the stages of reviewing our services, for looking for transformations that can deliver significant savings in order to have saved £3 million from our base budget by 2027. So once the savings from those transformations start to filter through and we start to realise those cashable savings, then hopefully, yes, that residual risk will reduce to a much more to a much lower level to be in the green.
With my previous role, Mrs. Keys, you know that I took a close interest on when we would see some deliverables from TC25, and I think the committee would like to see an idea of when they may see some deliverables, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. We've recently recruited a head of programme to run the TC25 programme of projects, and we're putting together all of the tracking information to see how those projects progress, and I look forward to being able to report that progress within our medium-term financial strategy paper that will come forward in the autumn.
Thank you very much. Councillor Godfrey, are you content? Or are you anticipating?
I've got another item added to a list of exciting things to look forward to.
We like to entertain you, as you know. Any other questions on this paper? Thank you. Any debate? Are we happy to note? I think we are asked to note this report. Governance monitoring. Page 65. We have noted the report, including the update, and we have raised any issues. Thank you very much. May we move on to, now what are we on to now? I think it must be the annual internal audit report and opinions. No, I'm so easily confused. The draft annual financial report, item 12. Mrs. Keys, are you introducing this one?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a report that we bring to you to confirm to committee that we have published the draft financial statements. They're ready for our auditors to come in and inspect. I will draw your attention to the fact that there's a statutory deadline for the production of the draft accounts, which is the 31st of March. We did not publish our draft financial statements by that date. We published them 3 weeks later on the 23rd of June. Because we had already been informed by our external auditors, Ernst & Young, that they weren't going to come in to audit us until September, October time. So I felt it was much better to take 3 additional weeks and make sure that we got the accounts right, and they were in a much better position to be audited than it was to try and rush them out for the 31st of May deadline. Talking to my CFO colleagues around Hampshire, there were a handful who did publish by the 31st of May, but there were more that didn't and that were in the same position as us. And all of those that did publish by the 31st of May, none of them have had their 21-22 audits completed. So actually the opening balances within those statements has the potential to change anyway. So I just wanted to reassure you that although we published late, we met with the legislation and we put the notice on our website to explain why that was. And within 3 weeks, we had those draft financial statements out. So committee are not asked to do anything other than note the financial statements at this point. I will come back to committee once the audit of those financial statements has been completed. And then it's for this committee to approve those ahead of the publication of the final audited accounts. And prior to that, we will do some training for members on attempting to make them more understandable.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. I'm sure we do have some questions. Could I suggest we take these in chunks because it's a very long report? Any questions on pages 101 to 104? Any questions on pages 105 to 127? Very happy. Any questions on the numbers, pages 128 to 137? 138 to 140? 141 to 177? Or the HRA, pages 178 to 182? The collection fund? Nothing on the collection fund and nothing on the governance statement. Thank you very much. Any other questions about any aspect of the report? In that case, I think we're happy to note. Is that agreed? You may, Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you. This is a matter of fact, not a matter we can question, which is why I've not felt necessary to quiz the matter. What I would like to observe is that these accounts have been completed in what I would consider to be a reasonable period of time, which is always a challenge, and I think our officers should be commended for that.
And we will commend them, especially given the late approval